Welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. Hi, I'm Michael.
This is Barbara.
And I'm Lauren. This month we read The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennet. We selected this book to celebrate Black History Month.
All right, so let's talk a little about the author. So the author is Brit Bennet. She was born and raised in Southern California. Brit graduated from Stanford University and later earned her MFA in fiction at the University of Michigan, where she won a Hopwood Award in graduate short fiction, as well as the 2014 Hurston Wright Award for college writers. She's a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree, and her debut novel, The Mothers, was a New York Times bestseller. Her second novel, the one we read for this podcast, The Vanishing Half, was an instant New York Times #1 bestseller. Her essays have also been featured in The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, The Paris Review, and Jezebel. Barbara, you want to tell us a little bit about the book itself?
Sure. So this was originally published on June 2nd of 2020, and the genre is historical fiction, coming of age, and domestic fiction, which I have never heard of. So
neither have I. I don't know what domestic fiction is. But
it is 343 pages, depending on the copy that you own. And it currently has, as of this recording, it currently has a 4.2 out of 5 on Goodreads, 4.3 out of 5 on Barnes & Nobles, 4.4 on Amazon, and a 4.5 on Audible. And it has been nominated for the Orwell Prize for Political Fiction for Longlist in 2021, the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2021, the NAACP Image Award for Fiction in 2020, and the Reading Women Award for Fiction in 2020, and it has won the Goodreads Choice Award for Historical Fiction in 2020 and the Long Island Reads in 2021. And I feel like that is all well-deserved. We also think it's important for readers to know what, if any, representation is in the books we read. And for this book, obviously there are a ton of POC characters. Love to see that. LGBTQ plus characters, but no persons with disabilities.
So if you're curious, before we look at the back of the book with Lauren, I did look up domestic fiction. Domestic fiction is a term used to describe a body of popular narrative literature written by, for, and about women.
Oh, that's cool.
Women's fiction.
Women's fiction. I didn't know that was a genre. Is there a men's fiction? Is that a thing?
Probably.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Domestic fiction is all sometimes referred to as sentimental fiction or women's fiction.
Oh, I don't like sentimental fiction. Don't like that.
I've heard of women's fiction.
I've heard of women's fiction. I've never heard of it called domestic fiction.
Extended, Amazon calls it women's domestic life fiction. Anywho, Lauren, you want to give us a little summary of the book?
Sure. So The Vanishing Half kind of focuses on the stories of identical twin sisters, Desiree and Stella, who live in what we found out is fictional town of Mallard, Louisiana, which is a community of Black people who are known to have Caucasian features. So basically, I think that the book describes them as like a light-skinned community, and they basically pride themselves on that fact. So they don't marry dark. I think that was a quote that they said, like, Mallard people, like, we don't marry dark. They pride themselves on kind of being able to, quote-unquote, pass as white in certain scenarios. And so that was interesting. The twins, the girls, are quite opposites. They have different dreams, different goals, different overall personalities. They're just they're not super alike. They end up giving up on some of those dreams when their mom makes them quit school at 16 to start working to help the family. Eventually, they venture off on their own paths and kind of go their separate ways. I don't want to get too in-depth because of spoilers, but Desiree then returns to Mallard after kind of a traumatic situation in her life and finds that Stella has kind of abandoned her and the family. There's lots of drama that unfolds throughout their journey to kind of find each other again. And that is my synopsis.
All right. Thank you. So what did you guys think about The Vanishing Half? And remember, no spoilers.
So I really enjoyed this book. I felt like the characters were all well-rounded, and I enjoyed reading the different dynamics and relationships between all of them. And this is a very heavy character-driven story, and I really enjoyed that. And I really enjoyed the representation in this book as well. It was a bit slow in the beginning for me, but after a certain part, I feel like the pacing wasn't an issue anymore for me, and I just like devoured the book and really enjoyed it. It was just a little bit in the beginning, but I feel like a lot of books are like that, just because it kind of has to like set up the book for you.
So this book for me was kind of like the definition of like, meh. Like, I didn't dislike the book. It wasn't bad. I didn't love the book. It wasn't like my favorite of all time either. It was just fine. It started off really slow, like Barbara said. I probably was feeling that more than you guys were, but I thought it was super slow at the beginning and didn't really pick up until some perspectives changed. But I would call this like I know it wasn't an official genre, but I would say it's like a slice of life book. And that's not really my cup of tea or something I'd normally jump out and read. Apparently also it's women's fiction. So
yeah, this is literally not written for you. So
it's not written by, for, or about me. So, I mean, it was a well-written, good story. But to be honest, I did struggle to get through it. I think, especially after last month's like Evelyn Hugo, like I like blazed through that. It was one of the like for first books in a while that I think I finished before either of you. Like I think I finished like the first week we started reading it, and then this one, like it was painstakingly like, okay, I had to make myself read it. It wasn't bad. It just wasn't my favorite book.
Here's my question: I know it's technically, you said not written for you, but do you not find it important for you to read these types of books, though?
No, I do. I think it's important to read this kind of book.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't hate the book. Like I said, I thought it was a good story. It was well written. It just wasn't my favorite.
I enjoyed this book. Like you both said, I think it was well written. I really liked the characters. Most all of the characters had some kind of an arc. Lots of just in-depth looks into the characters and their stories and their histories. I always like to read books that have representation, both of other cultures, but also of just like the LGBTQIA community as well. I thought that was really well done in this, especially for being a historical fiction book. I really liked to kind of see that they did include a transsexual man in the story. I thought that was interesting and just really well done. And I enjoyed just getting the perspective from the other cultures in the novel as well.
I would just like to say that this is how you write women well. Mr. Southern book vampire slaying man.
Grady Hendrix is the name you're looking for.
There we go. Mr. Grady Hendrix. Take a page out of Brit. How to write women correctly. Right. This is how you do it.
So like always, we're not going to go into our individual scores for now. We've got to wait till the end for that. But our group score for this one was a 7.4 out of 10. So with that, would you recommend this book? Yeah, I think I would, especially if you enjoy this genre. I would absolutely, with a slice of life or domestic fiction, I would absolutely recommend this book if you're into that kind of stuff.
So not all slice of life or domestic fiction, now that we know what domestic fiction is.
I split that into two different sections.
Okay.
So yeah, I would recommend it. And like Barbara said, I mean, I think it's an important book, even if it's not your cup of tea or something you would usually, rush to pick up. I think it's, like Lauren mentioned, like reading books that talk about other cultures, and especially where you get to see different perspectives outside of your own. It's important to read those kind of stories. And so for that reason, because this book was so well written, I would absolutely recommend it.
Yeah, I would recommend this one. I thought that it had maybe a slightly slow start, but I felt like it picked up after just the first couple of chapters. I wouldn't go so far as Michael, you said, it took you the whole first half to get into it. It took me like a couple chapters, but I think like you
so
just
to be clear, the book is like 15 chapters long, and the chapters are like 30 to 40 minutes per chapter to read. So they're long chapters.
Either way, I think it's worth the read for anyone. I think that men should read it. I think that women should read it. I think that it does a really good job of, like I said before, representation, and then it just has really solid characters. So I would recommend it.
Yes, I too would recommend this book. It has great characters and perspectives, and honestly, I think it's one of those books that just makes you think and opens conversations to important things to talk about with other people and different perspectives, and kind of makes you think internal and, against your own biases, other people's, and I think it's just a good conversation starter as well. So 100% I would recommend this book.
That's a 3 out of 3 recommendation. So for those of you leaving us at this point, don't forget to give us a rating if you like us, and leave a review if the app you use allows you to. And make sure you're following us on Facebook and Instagram. In both places, our handle is @BadassLitPod. We'd love to hear from you. If you've got a book you want us to read on a future episode, let us know. Now, Lauren's going to give us a short preview of what we've got coming up next month.
So next month we are reading The Secret Life of Bees by Sue Monk Kidd, which was recommended to us by Sharon on Facebook. Thanks, Sharon. Secret Life of Bees has been on my TBR list for a while, so I'm excited. All right, here's the preview. Set in South Carolina in 1964, The Secret Life of Bees tells the story of Lily Owens, whose life has been shaped around the blurred memory of the afternoon her mother was killed. When Lily's fierce-hearted black stand-in mother, Rosaline, insults 3 of the deepest racists in town, Lily decides to spring them both free. They escape to Tiburon, South Carolina, a town that holds the secret to her mother's past. Taken in by an eccentric trio of black beekeeping sisters, Lily is introduced to their mesmerizing world of bees and honey and the Black Madonna. This is a remarkable novel about divine female power, a story women will share and pass on to their daughters for years to come.
So remember, the second part of this episode, as always, is going to be an in-depth look at this book. So if you do want to read The Vanishing Half, stop listening right now and come back when you are done.
Hi, this is Leah Stuhler, creator and host of YA Book Chat podcast. If you love reading young adult books and chatting about them with your friends, then head on over to my podcast and take a listen. Each episode, my guest and I chat about a different YA book. We start spoiler-free and then head into our spoiler section where we dive into the mysteries of each book. And we do it with laughs and fun along the way. You can listen to YA Book Chat on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and wherever you get your podcast. And now, back to the show.
Now, for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go. So we're going to start off like we always do and talk about who gets the Badass Character Award. Lauren, who did you nominate?
I nominated Jude, and I picked Jude because the character was just really well written. If it weren't for her, really, the story wouldn't be a story. I mean, she's the one that was persistent enough to pursue really the truth about where she came from, who she is, her mom, her aunt, all of that. And then also just her relationship later on in the novel with Reese, and just her openness and her just, I feel like she deserves the Badass Character Award.
I would second that. I picked Jude as well, or nominated Jude, for all the same reasons Lauren gave. I thought she was the most interesting character to read. I feel like she was very open and honest, and like Lauren said, she was the one who was pursuing like the history between her mom and her aunt. She's the one who I feel like maybe was like the glue that held them all together. She was the one that connected all of them. She was the one who pursued Kennedy to then meet up with Stella and kind of started that whole, or got the ball rolling for all of them. So I really like Jude and just how she was as a character. I really kind of gravitated towards her out of everyone.
I would actually argue that the book is full of badass characters, actually. Looking at this list of characters we have here in our notes, there are only a handful or less that I wouldn't consider for this award at some point. So Jude obviously won because they both picked Jude, but I actually picked Desiree for this one. I picked her primarily because, she always had dreams of getting away from her hometown of Mallard, and she did successfully, and she started a life. And then it turned out her husband was kind of a wife-beating scumbag. And so she did what she had to do, and she got out of there with her daughter, Jude, and went back the one place that she never wanted to go back to. And so I think that some of the decisions that she made to protect herself and to protect her family make her a badass. And also, just later in life, some of the more mundane decisions she makes, like sticking around in Mallard to take care of her aging mom, and some other things along those lines. So that's why I picked Desiree. But Jude is the winner of the Badass Character Award for this book.
You finally won one, Lauren.
I know, that's what I was thinking when I saw that you picked Jude too. I was like, yay, they didn't gang up on me this time.
So I'm going to bounce around a little bit here in this section, because before we talk about the characters, I actually want to talk a little bit about part of the story. I want to talk about what the title means, the title of the book means in the context of this story, because I think that's a good place to jump in.
I mean, we kind of touched on this in our pre-discussion, but I feel like the title is kind of referring to the fact that twins, especially identical twins, their lives are so intertwined from jump, like from in utero. And so then that's where I get, the half of a whole, because a lot of times identical twins will even describe themselves as one person, like one person, two bodies kind of thing. And so the vanishing half, I kind of took that to mean symbolically that, when Stella abandoned her sister and her family subsequently, but mainly her other half, her other, twin, to go and basically take on the persona of a white person living in California. That's where I kind of thought the title came from.
So I think it's definitely part that, but I think there's another layer of it too. Like, and I didn't think about this until Barbara actually mentioned in our pre-show talk that the original Vignes ancestor who started this community was half black, half white, and so by that nature, all of them would be half and half of some level, or at least part white, part black. And I think that for Stella, the vanishing half was her black half. She kind of let that disappear into the background when she chose to live her life as a white woman.
Yeah, I think it fits almost all of the main characters. I feel like each of them kind of let a half of who they were, quote unquote, vanish. Like, I feel like Desiree is the one who picked her black side versus Stella picking her, quote unquote, white side.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for Jude, it was her Mallard side, the fact that she hated growing up and being from Mallard because of what she looked like. And so she wanted to get so far away from them. And then for Reese, who's, I would say, out of some of the characters, a secondary, almost one of the main characters as well. Like who he was before,
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to run away from that and leave that in the past. And I don't know with Kennedy. I feel like maybe with Kennedy, it was more of she didn't know who she was and she always felt lost.
Yeah.
And then when she learned about her history, I feel like she finally was able to start healing that part of her that felt lost. So I think it kind of fits all that now that I think about it. Because at first when I was reading, I was like, I don't get it.
No, that's a good point. With all of them were kind of either chasing the half
Right.
that they don't have, or running from something in their lives that they didn't kind of want to come to terms with, or didn't want, they wanted to leave behind.
There's other parts you could actually, that I just thought of too. Like, I mean, if you look at like Adele, like the vanishing half for her was her husband who was killed. But I mean, if you look, and Desiree and Stella, like their dad, like half of their parental unit, they watched be murdered in front of them.
Man, this is getting deep, guys.
It's real deep.
There's a lot of ways you could look at it, and I think that makes it a very poignant title.
And that's why I said I like this book, because it gets the conversations rolling.
All right, so now we can jump into the characters a little bit, and I think it makes sense to start with the character you spend the first big chunk of the book with, which is Desiree. So Desiree is the twin that Barbara mentioned, or one of you mentioned, stayed with her black side. She came from Mallard, obviously, where, as Lauren mentioned earlier, like there's a quote in the book that nobody in Mallard marries dark. Like they pride themselves on being light-skinned. And so when Desiree and Stella ran away, and eventually Desiree ended up by herself, Desiree ended up marrying a very dark man and giving birth to a very dark daughter as well, Jude. Do you guys have any thoughts on
Yes,
her
I have lots of thoughts.
Oh, let's hear them.
So in the beginning, it's funny because like we only get Desiree's perspective of them growing up, and the way she describes Stella, I kind of gravitated towards Stella because she was more bookish, more quiet, the introverted sister, whereas Desiree was described to be like the hooligan, the extroverted one of the twins, the one who kind of took life, and she was the one who wanted to leave Mallard and not Stella. She was the one who always wanted to leave. And then you kind of get her story, and like I gravitated towards Stella, but then we get Stella's perspective, and then I shifted, and I was like, you know what? I really like Desiree more after we got like Stella's perspective. I mean, what Stella went through was different, but so I thought that was really interesting in getting Desiree's perspective and what she went through and how different things affected them differently, and getting the perspective later on for Stella. I also liked her relationship with Jude and her relationship with her mom and her relationship with Early. I think that's how he said he pronounces his name, Early.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and kind of the trials and tribulations that she went through, and just it made her a stronger female character, and I really, really liked her at the end. In the beginning, I was just like, oh, she's kind of this, and I liked that the author made me change my perspective and made me change my opinion about her. So that's my 2 cents, I guess, on Desiree.
So since you mentioned Early with Desiree, I thought it'd be fun to mention, because I thought about this before. I think it's funny that Desiree and Early are in this like serious relationship, but never get married. It never, gets to that point. But she's always on her daughter's butt. Like, why aren't you and Reese getting married? Why aren't you and Reese getting married?
Well, Jude even says, like, what about you and Early, Mom? She's like, what about us? It's different. She's like, no, it's not.
I just thought that was funny because they essentially, I mean, it's the same kind of a thing, right? They're both. Yeah. They both have domestic partners in the sense that they're living with their significant others. They're just not married.
Well, they both love their respective partners so yeah.
Well, I mean, there's another fold of that, which we'll get to soon when we talk more about Jude. And Lauren, did you have anything to say about Desiree?
I mean, I liked Desiree from the start. I enjoyed her character. I sympathized with her character, and kind of just the fact that, she did go through so much, and then also just with losing Stella, or feeling like she, there was no closure for her with what happened with that, and didn't know where she was, what she was doing, just that she, kind of abandoned her. So I felt like I always appreciated Desiree's character. And like Barbara, like you said, her relationship with Jude and her relationship with the mom, like she was just a solid female character. And then, I mean, the author did a really good job of developing her character throughout the story as well.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I only went with Stella just because that's how I was as a kid. Like, I was more introverted. Like, and I'm just comparing like me and my sister's relationship. Like, my sister was Desiree and I was Stella to a T. Like, to a T. Like, we're not twins, but we're so close in age that people always assumed that we were twins. And, I was the little sister that like hung off my sister and was like, anything she does and I want to be just like her. And like that scene that we get where Stella describing like their father's funeral, where Stella didn't have to say anything because Desiree knew what to say for her. I felt that with my sister. Like, there's times when I didn't know what to say. I was just like internalizing everything, and my sister stepped up for me and was the one who did that. So when reading about their childhood, I connected with Stella more, but then reading them as adults, I connected with Desiree more. And it just goes to show you like how people aren't just one dimensional. This is why I love this book. Like, these are 3-dimensional characters. Absolutely love them.
100% agree. So moving on from Desiree, let's talk about the other half, which is Stella. We don't get a whole lot. I mean, we get Desiree's perspective of Stella in the first part of the book. And it's not for a while longer before we actually get to see how things are from Stella's side. But I thought her character was really interesting. It was like Barbara said earlier, it was interesting to see, I guess it was interesting to hear about her exclusively from her sister's perspective, and then kind of get that flipped when we get to hear some from her. But it was interesting to get, when you got like her perspective chapters when she was living her life as a white woman in a, rich white neighborhood. In fact, like there was that one scene that was kind of, it was uncomfortable almost to read, where it was like the neighborhood association meeting when she was like speaking vehemently against black people moving into the neighborhood, which I thought was kind of crazy, but I guess just commitment to her role.
Yeah. I mean, I thought the same thing as far as commitment to her life that she had built, and also just fear of people finding out about what she left behind, and that she would be considered a fraud, and just that community was so kind of racist in itself that they didn't want black people to move in. And yes, she was pretty vocal, but like all of the little wives and all the people, I mean, that was just kind of the overarching like theme of where they lived, was just that they, didn't want that. And so, but I liked Stella's character. I liked and hated Stella's character, I guess. I found myself being really frustrated with her for Desiree and even for Kennedy. Like, just because, you're basically living a lie, and regardless of your reasoning for why you decided to abandon your entire history and your family, like, I understand that she had her reasonings for that, but to then have a child that doesn't know who she is really and doesn't get to choose that for herself, like to know where she came from, and basically just indoctrinating your beliefs about who they're going to be. I just feel like that I found myself angry with her a lot.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I liked her character. I think she was well written, and I liked getting her perspective later on, but I just found the majority of my feelings towards Stella were like frustration.
So I think Stella is a beautifully complex character. Getting her point of view and seeing things of why she did it was really interesting. And just like Lauren said, like, I was frustrated with her, but empathetic. I understood her reasoning. I don't agree with her reasonings whatsoever, but I understand why she did it. And I feel like she's just, as someone who kind of is similar in the sense of being an introvert, like, I understand, like, she thought she needed to get out and all that stuff, but I think how she handled the situation with her daughter, I don't agree with, and how she abandoned her sister and her family like that, I also don't agree with. And it was actually really nice to read someone who was so flawed like her. She's very flawed. Out of all the characters, I think she's one of the most. Her and her daughter, but her daughter has good reasoning because she was lied to, and she knows, like, well, we'll get to Kennedy later, but anyways, I just enjoyed reading such a flawed character in that way, because I liked feeling frustrated with her and reading her perspective and getting sickened by her decisions of how she handled that. And like you guys mentioned during that meeting, that she was like, no, Black people and all that stuff, that came from a place of fear, because she had one instance as a child when she went and tried to pass off as white, and a Black handyman or like a museum helper like realized what she was doing and winked at her, and so she never felt safe around other Black people because she was always in fear that they would notice that she was Black, and her lies would come tumbling down, and she like grew this empire of lies with her relationship and who she was, and she was constantly in fear that one person was going to tear that down. Mm-hmm. And it's sad because she never felt like she fit in the white world. Like, she made no friends with the white women. She didn't relate to the white women, and she did with her neighbor. And you could see that. You could see her coming out of her shell. You could see her relating to her. And then she goes and screws that up because her fear of her lies come tumbling down is greater than anything else. And it's sad. It's really sad because she's a lonely individual because she can't trust anybody. She can't rely on anybody because of her lies, and she did that to herself. And I'm curious to know if she thought that was worth it, because at the end she probably thought it was, and I don't think that would be.
Well, and just the fact that, with the whole neighbor situation and their daughters playing together or whatever, and their falling out that happened there, she was so committed to this lie and this hatred towards who she is, really, that, like, clearly the N-word was just something that was said in their home, enough to where Kennedy was repeating it with this little girl. And then that was ultimately kind of the beginning of the end of that relationship that could have been a really good friendship. And I mean, there's a question later on that we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. But yeah, I mean, Stella's character is just sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what Barbara said as far as it was a very well-written, flawed character that had you falling in love with her as often as she did having you frustrated with what she was doing and the decisions she was making. So next main character, let's talk about Jude. What were you guys' thoughts on Desiree's daughter, Jude?
I mean, I love Jude. I thought I related with her as well. Like, it's funny. Like, when I was reading this, I feel like Jude is the daughter that Stella always wanted because it's her. essentially. Like, she's the studious kind. She's the one who loved school and pursued her passions in schooling, everything that Stella wanted and didn't have and wanted in her child. That was Jude, but that was Desiree's daughter. Whereas Kennedy is like the wild child, the one who has no direction in life and all this stuff, which was kind of how everyone described Desiree when she was younger.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting that they had kind of the daughters that kind of represented each other but switched. And I really, really like Jude just because of her inner strength. It's not like, oh, she's muscular and this type of like physical strength. It's the inner strength that she exudes that I really, really enjoyed with her, as far as the hate that she went through with her own people in that community of Mallard because they hated her dark skin or they treated her differently because of her dark skin, and how she never felt like herself there. And then she, got away and went to school and proved them wrong with a education and running, what is it called? A scholarship. She got a scholarship to go to school because of running, when all they're like, oh, you run funny and all this other stuff. And we're always like poking fun of her. She became a freaking badass doctor. Good for her. And then, her relationship with Reese and how she thought he would never love her because of what she looked like. And he was fighting his own battles, and they just they're like two puzzle pieces that just fit so perfectly well together. And I absolutely loved their relationship. And I loved her relationship with her mom, and how she hated that her mom brought her back to Mallard, but still loved and appreciated everything that her mom did for her. And also her relationship with Kennedy, how it was kind of this pull of wanting to relate to her, wanting a relationship out of her, but they're just too different and grew up too differently. And I don't know, I just really, really, like, I could keep going on and on about Jude and why I loved her, but
No.
I heart Jude. And I just feel like because she was so judged, she's like the least judgmental character after everything that Kennedy still did to her. Like, she still forgave her and she still empathized with her. She still knew, like, she still wanted to pursue that relationship even after Kennedy was a huge freaking asswipe to her. Like, she still was like, hey, it's okay, I get it. Like, I think it's her empathy towards other and her so easily trusting people when no one's ever given her a good reason to, be that way, but she still is that way. And this is what I talk about strong female characters. Like, she's not wielding a sword. She doesn't have chainmail around her. She's not fighting dragons. She's not a fantasy character, but this is the type of well-written female character that I like, that she doesn't have any of these things, but she's still strong in who she is. And that, I love that. I love seeing that. So.
Amen.
Yep.
Well, that's why she won the Badass Character Award. All of those things. I mean, I would agree with everything that you just said as far as her strength, her empathy, her ability to be resilient towards the world that has not been kind to her at all. Her community, being shitty, her, but still pursuing the truth and still seeking out Kennedy and still wanting to know about Stella and wanting to understand more about where she came from, even though, every sign is pointing to her to just drop it. I don't know. She is an amazing character. She's super well written. And like Barbara said, like, she doesn't have to have a sword and magical powers or anything to be badass and strong in this one. It's really, really good.
I thought there's not a lot left to say after what you guys covered on her. But yeah, I mean, she was an amazing character. There was definitely times where it was sad reading some of her parts of a story, though, just because, like, I think the reason that she was so invested in learning about Stella is because she kind of inherited some of her mom's trauma from Stella abandoning her. And, I think that the reason that her and Reese's relationship happened and was so beautiful was because they both experienced so much hatred and discrimination for things that they couldn't change about themselves. There was definitely a lot of sadness and trauma around that too, but I think that just added to the character being as awesome as she was. So I don't know how much you guys are going to have to say about Adele, but she is the next character on the list, the mom.
It's just the mom. I mean, she is who she is, obviously. She loved her daughters fiercely, but life dictated having to pull them when they were young, and that kind of affected, I think that got the ball rolling for Stella agreeing with Desiree to run away. And it's sad towards the end where she gets dementia, Alzheimer's. I don't remember one of those two.
I believe it was Alzheimer's.
Yeah. And it was sad to see her being like looking at Desiree and seeing Stella, and their dynamic, and how she didn't like Early, but then she did like Early begrudgingly, like he treated her well and helped Desiree take care of her. And like, I enjoyed the little that we did get. Like, she's another flawed character, but with reasonings, and I liked her relationship with them, and it was sad and beautiful at the same time.
She was. Yeah, I loved seeing her relationship with Early. I think that was my favorite part of her character, was watching, because like throughout the beginning of the book, the beginning of the story, especially when he was like a little boy, like she essentially hated him for being dark-skinned, and she treated him differently. And so just to see him even as a boy, and then eventually a man, like never be defeated by that. Like he just kept coming back. He's like, I'm just going to like kill her with kindness. And to see her slowly wear down over time, like you said, and realize that, he's actually this amazing person who's really good for my daughter. And he happens to also take care of me when he's here too. And it was really interesting to see their relationship grow and eventually blossom.
Yeah. I mean, you guys pretty much covered everything with Adele. She is a central character. She is, kind of the meeting back point, I guess. Keep staying in Mallard, just kind of being there for the family when she can.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that she's a well-written character too. We just don't get to see as much of her story in detail as we do some of the other ones. We hear about her with Early and her relationship there, and I did really like that. But we don't get a whole lot of plot surrounding her specifically. So
that was a little bit about Adele. Do you guys have a lot to talk about Kennedy, Stella's daughter?
I mean, I think we've covered quite a bit of Kennedy. But her character, I sympathize for her so much, because she comes across when you're reading it as really a bee. And she was unfortunately raised that way. And so like, instead of being mad that she's treating people that way, you almost feel bad for her because she doesn't know any better. And then you get pissed if you're me, because you're like, she was raised this way because of the flawed beliefs of Stella. And then just the fact that, she has to have some sort of feeling inside of her that like she doesn't know who she is, and maybe she, we find that later on. It's just basically realizing that she's been lied to her whole life, and just, I don't know. She's a strong character too. Every time I would read parts with her in it, I would find myself getting mad at Stella again.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to mention earlier, she knew from a very young age that her mom was keeping things from her. Like, she had these distinct memories where Stella was like, hey, I'm from Mallard and it's this place and then your grandma and all this stuff. And then when she was a little bit older, like 5, 7 or something like that, she's like, oh, hey mom, you mentioned Mallard and you mentioned grandma and all this stuff. And her mom literally straight up said, nah, like you're lying. I didn't say any of this. Like, that does something to a child. That effed up her psyche. Like, that, the reason why she acted out and all of these stuff is because like she has this duology in her. Like, she remembers her mom saying this, she knows this, she knows her mom is lying to her, and yet her mom is like vehemently saying, no, you're wrong, I didn't say that, I'm not lying to you. So of course that's gonna F up someone. In like, she's lost, she feels this way because her mom kind of, I feel like, split her, like in that half, right. Like she's a half of a person here, because like she has these core memories of these things here, and her mom's telling her no, her dad's telling her no, like her dad doesn't even know, the poor guy, in this sense. And so she's kind of like lost,
making her feel crazy,
right? Exactly. And then she repeats what her mom told her, like with her little friend, and she called her that, the N-word, and her mom slaps her, and then she's confused. It's like, well, you can use that, but I can't, like, and then her mom hates her. It's this whole dynamic. Their relationship, like I said, is, I hate saying beautifully written. It is beautifully written, but like how it affects, like you can see that. You can see all of like Lauren said, Stella's trauma just bleed into her daughter, and that's how she is, and it's not her fault, because I feel like it was her acting out, and her mom, instead of telling her the truth, kept lying. Even after she brought a picture of her mom, she still said, I don't know what you're talking. Like, how do you do that to your child? And that's what broke my heart for Kennedy. Like, she's just confused. She was just a confused kid, and her mom just grabbed onto her life so tightly because she did want it to unravel. And I mean, but I'm pretty sure back then what Stella did was illegal. Back then, her hiding the fact that she was half black or whatever you want to say, I think it was back then that was illegal. Like, she would have gone to jail. Wouldn't they have like jailed her for that? Because back then it was like not okay to do that shit. It was just ridiculous in and itself. But like, pretty sure she would have been, if not illegal, then they would have murdered her just by, stoning her or like being rude and all this. Like, I just feel like she would have gone to jail. So she was like, I get it. Stella was afraid because at this point she lied too much, but that kept Kennedy from knowing who she was, and that my heart broke for Kennedy because that wasn't her fault. And I feel like she grew up. And like she said, she's like, Mom, I don't even know who you are. Because like she never opened up to her daughter. Like she never told her about her past or any of this stuff because she didn't want her knowing. And like that affects a kid, you know?
Yeah, no, I think best case scenario, if that had come out, she would have lost her entire life. Blake would have left her. She would have been shunned by all of her friends and her community that she'd built. Worst case scenario, she would have been lynched because it was the South during a time when it wasn't. Yeah. So, all right. So let's see. We talked about Kennedy. Let's talk about Reese a little bit, and then that'll be the last of our characters we talk about because I think we covered some of the other ones on the list. So Reese was a pretty major character. Like Barbara said earlier, he was, he's definitely, I guess, a secondary character as if you had to label it, but he's a pretty major character in Jude's story, especially Jude's boyfriend that you find out is transgender at one point in the book. And so it was really, really interesting to see a character, I guess not just a character like that in the book, but to see how that character had to live their lives or their life in the 1960s Southern America. Because obviously it's still hard to be, that kind of like to be a transgender person today in 2022. And I can't imagine how much scarier it would have been then. So it was interesting to see a character like that in the book and to kind of have those struggles, as well on the side, on top of the other racial struggles we're getting throughout the rest of the book.
Yeah, I appreciated Reese's character for the sheer fact that the representation, you just don't see that in historical fiction pieces. Even though we know that there were plenty of homosexual, bisexual, transsexual, like people that were alive in that time period, you just don't really get a glimpse into what that looked like for them because it was so frowned upon. And so, like you said, Michael, it's still really difficult for that whole community, even now. But to think about how difficult it was then when it was just such an unknown, like people just didn't talk about it. There's movements and things now that, I feel like the community has a lot more support now than they ever have. And then just to kind of get the perspective of having to buy his testosterone and stuff, literally like a drug, in an alley, and then having to arrange for the medical procedure for his top surgery and just how like that sort of looked and that only certain doctors would do it and you couldn't tell anybody and it was kind of on the hush hush. Whereas, the medical options that are available today to that community are a lot different. They're still not great. But as far as the testosterone or estrogen goes, I think that hormone replacement therapy can be covered through insurance, but I don't know about the surgeries. And then I just also really liked Reese's character in general. So if you take out his whole background and all of that, and just look at him as a boyfriend and a human, just the character was great. Like the way that he cared for Jude and the way that he supported her and the way that, their kind of stories intertwined. I liked Reese.
Yeah, agreed. I really enjoyed getting a bit of his perspectives whenever we did get a bit of his intertwined with Jude's, like his background, his story, what he went through. And it's funny because there's this distinct scene that I remember where Jude is like, I don't see how Stella could have abandoned her family, how she could have just dropped them like a bad habit and all this stuff. And then she kind of stops herself because she's like, oh no, that's like what Reese did. But like the difference is, I feel like Stella came from her sister loved her, her mom loved her, you know, whereas Reese, his father did not approve. We don't know anything else as far as like maybe like his mom, or if I think he had an older sister or something. We don't know about them and their relationship, but I feel like it's different. Like, whereas I understand why Reese did that, like he didn't feel loved, didn't feel appreciated, didn't, you know, like wasn't accepted, whereas she was. So it's a bit different. So I like that dynamic of showing the differences between them. Reese's story is, like you guys said, like a cool perspective to read because we really don't get a lot of that back then either. And the things that he had to go through, like the way that he was doing it, like the doctor said, like you're screwing up your liver, because that's the only way he could have back then gotten hormonal therapy like that, which is ridiculous. And same with surgery. Like you said, it was hush hush. It was, what do they call it? Those types of surgeries back then? Like they were...
Back alley surgeries.
Back alley surgeries. Thank you. Back alley surgeries, because doctors could have lost their licenses if they did that, which is, you have to, you laugh because the alternatives to cry about that. And it's just ridiculous to think that. But anyways, I really liked his character. Like Lauren said also, like his relationship with Jude, regardless of his background, like he was, I think, everything Jude needed in a significant other, in a partner, because of how she felt with her father, you know, and how she saw that relationship and how different it was with her and Reese. And I love them together. My little cold heart melted for them.
You said cold heart is cold black heart, I think is what you meant to say.
Right. My cold black heart.
So let's jump into some of these questions we have for this one, because I think some of these are going to bring out some interesting discussion too. So the first one is, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but Desiree and Stella's father is murdered by white men in a horrific crime that sees no justice. The tragedy impacted the sisters in different ways. Desiree seems to bury it, but Stella is very traumatized by it. Why do you think Stella made such a significant decision to leave behind everything and deny a huge part of who she is?
No two people are going to look at something the same. You know, like you can look at a flower and I'm going to perceive something very differently than the other person. So I think that is just how that went. As far as, I think Stella, it turned her into a very fearful person. And then when she realized that her ticket out of that fear, which she thought that it would be her ticket out of being fearful every day for her life, was to pass as white. But really it just turned into, now it's a different fear of being caught. Yeah. Instead of being black, it's versus someone's going to know that I'm black. So I think she just changed one fear out for another. And that's just why she wanted to run away. And the fact that she got molested at a young age by a creepy white man. And I feel like she thought this was her only way out of that life. And that's why she did that. And that, I don't know why it affected her differently than Desiree. Like I said, like that's something we don't have the context for. But I do think that's why, like, she had little nightmares. She would wake up with nightmares of always being fearful that was going to happen to her or her family. Yep. And like I said, I think she changed out one fear for the other. She thought maybe she would finally feel free being white and passing as white. But she just changed that out to being fearful that someone's going to find out instead.
Yep. I 100% agree. I think she made the decision because she thought that was how she could get away from the trauma and the fear that she experienced there. But I think what we see in Stella's story is that she's effectively running from something her entire life. She ran away from the black side of her identity and thought that would make it better. But then, like you said, Barbara, instead of being afraid of white people, now she's afraid every time she sees a black person that they might be able to see through her mask and figure out who she really is. But I also think it it causes her, like making that decision causes her to live, I guess like an incomplete life kind of, because she's not really herself. She's constantly wearing this mask, pretending to be somebody else. And
yeah, she's hiding a part of who she is.
yeah.
I mean, I had said just that I feel like Stella has always clung to the idea that she could pass as white and have a better life if she could just escape her Black identity. And that, coupled with her trauma that she had experienced with, being Black, which is ironic because a lot of the trauma that she witnessed was like white people harming Black people. So why, in my head, would you want to go and join the race that has caused so much pain for you and your family? But I'll never understand that, being, not being a person of color and not being able to kind of relate with that. I feel like that's something that I can't really speak to personally, but to me, just my instinct says, why would you want to go and become someone who belongs to the race that is responsible for so much of your trauma? But I do feel like that when the opportunity presented itself for her to kind of disappear and get out of Mallard and basically leave that part of her behind, she didn't feel like she had another option because she had so much trauma associated with being Black and had this just desperate desire to escape that. But there is that caveat of me just wondering throughout the book, like, why she would want to become someone who basically traumatized, was responsible for her and her family's, a lot of their pain, but...
So I can't speak on her or anyone else, but I will speak for myself on this. I think it has more to do with the fact that she saw that it was towards her race, that it was towards Black people. So if she was white, that wouldn't be towards her. That's a shield for her because it's like these white people are doing these things because of who they are, So if she were to pass off as white, then that kind of shifts that where like they won't look at her to traumatize her, they're going to look at other Black people. So I think not sure, can speak for that, but I think that would be the reasoning. I feel like,
yeah, and that makes sense that she would want to protect herself in that way. It's just hard for me to get my head around that you're going to protect yourself from further trauma, but really you're traumatizing your own child and your own,
100%. Yeah.
Kind of becoming a participant in that by your hatred of Black people in your community and stuff. And so, yeah, you're not being targeted anymore, but you are kind of becoming a part of the problem, which I would think that, you wouldn't want to do that if you were in her shoes, but I can't speak to that, like I said.
So moving on from there and kind of along the same vein, despite the fact that Stella takes on a new identity as a white woman, her past is always with her. Do you agree that no matter how far away home is, it never leaves you? And I do agree in this case. And I think it's similar to what I mentioned in the last question. I think that no matter how much distance she puts between herself and her old identity or her Black identity, it's never gone. And I think the most heartbreaking scene of this in the book was when you see Stella hanging out with her new African-American neighbor, and you kind of see her being herself for the first time in a long time around this woman, but then also realizing like that she needs to to not do that because it's not safe for her to do that. And it was really sad to see their interactions together and like how easy it was for her to be friends with her, but how like the side of her that's like afraid, realized like that she shouldn't be, kind of pushing against it. It was really sad to see that for me. But so yeah, I think no matter how far away you run, your home is always part of you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that Stella finds that out too at the end. She's not really able to fully run away from who she is, because it does come back to her. And, she's also never truly able to achieve a sense of true identity because her entire life that she's kind of made for herself is based on a fabrication. And so I think that, yeah, your history and where you come from and who you are as a person, you can try and separate yourself from that, but I feel like it's always going to be there. And in this case, it's always going to find you in the form of Jude being persistent, in this specific case, but things always circle back around.
No, I agree with all of you guys. I feel like your past and all those things kind of are layered into who you are. And sure, you can unlearn a lot of things, you can teach yourself, but that initial reaction that you always have to things is like the inner you, the child you, the past you, whatever you want to call it, that's going to be a part of you regardless. I don't think you can run away from it. You can learn from it. I think you can grow from it. But as far as trying to erase it, you can't erase that. That would be like trying to erase part of your identity. And I feel like, to kind of mirror what you guys said, like I feel like she was always looking behind her shoulder, like never really fit in because she wasn't just herself. She was scared to be herself around everybody.
It's moving on from there, but again, kind of along the same vein. How do you think Stella was able to hide the fact that she's Black for so long? How do you think she was able to conceal it from Blake? And do you think she'll ever tell him the truth?
I mean, it seems like physically she had a lot of Caucasian features. So if she had honed the art of deception well enough, which it seems that she did, I suppose she could get away with being whoever she wanted to be in that regard. I think that she was able to conceal it from Blake because she felt like he fell in love with who he thought she was when she worked for him. Like, she was white. Like, she, and there's one scene where she even asks, like, would you still love me if I wasn't white? Or if I was Black or something? And he says no, because then you wouldn't be who you are. And it's like, just...
That was actually Kennedy and her boyfriend.
Oh, was it?
Yes. Sorry.
Just kidding. No, you're good. I thought it was them. But anyway, I feel like she didn't want to jeopardize her relationship with him by sharing with him who she truly was, because she didn't feel like he didn't love her for who she ran from. In her perspective, he loved her because she was white, or passing as white.
It's kind of complicated. How is she able to hide the fact that she's Black? I mean, it's literally, the book says it, like, if you just act like you're supposed to be there, no one's going to doubt you. Like, some people might have, like, reservations, but if you kind of smooth that over and tell them no and all this stuff, then they're going to believe you. I mean, you see that in everything. It's, so if you just pretend you're supposed to be there and just tell people this shit, they're going to believe you. As far as how she was able to conceal it from Blake, it's the same thing. Like, he wasn't looking for that. She never gave him a reason to, so why would he doubt her? Like, I feel like most humans are intrinsically, like, you're trusting of people. Like, you don't think right off the bat, like, this person's lying. At least I hope you don't think that. That's kind of a crappy way to live life, So unless you've been, like, really traumatized, that's not your first initial thought of someone is, like, they're lying, they're keeping something from me. So she never gave him any reason, so he didn't doubt her. As far as, do I think she'll ever tell him the truth? No, unfortunately, I don't think she would. I think she's grasped onto this lie, and I don't think she wants to let it go. I mean, obviously, look at the steps that she's gone through to keep up with this. Why would she do that now?
I agree with both of you. I don't have a whole lot more to add on this one. I think she was able to hide the fact because, like Lauren said, it seemed like she physically had a lot of Caucasian features. And like you both said, if you act like you belong there and you walk the part, talk the part, all that stuff, then people are going to believe you. And obviously over the decades, she got better and better at that. And so it was never difficult. It was interesting, though, to read about some of the different times when she was worried, like at first, especially like the first time that her and Blake made love, she was worried when she took her clothes off that he'd be able to tell immediately. And so there were different moments like that where she would, like, there was that scene, and there were times earlier on where she would see other Black people and be worried that they would be able to recognize immediately that she was living a lie. But I think that obviously she was able to conceal it. And I think that, like you both said, that I don't think she'll ever tell him the truth. I mean, maybe it'll be like a deathbed confession or something way later in life, but otherwise I don't believe that she will. I think there's too much at stake for her to tell the truth there. All right, so moving on. If they would have actually developed a true friendship, do you think Stella would have ever told her neighbor Loretta the truth about who she really is? Do you think Loretta suspected anything about Stella?
I feel like Stella wanted to tell Loretta, because I think even in parts of that, I think she was like, oh, sometimes I wish I could just tell her, like, what would Loretta think? What would people think if I just told her? I think she, like, fantasized about telling her. I'm sure it's, like, this huge weight off her shoulders if she actually did. So I do think maybe eventually I think she would have cracked. I really do, because I think she noticed she felt it, where she could truly be herself around Loretta versus how she was keeping all this in when she was outside of Loretta's home, I guess, or just her proximity. Like, she wasn't acting herself as she was. And I feel like that's a lot to carry for one person. So I do think she might have eventually told her. Do I think Loretta suspected anything about Stella? I feel like she probably did. Loretta is a smart woman. I feel like she did suspect something, and I think that's maybe what hurt her the most. Was she might not have known what it was that Stella was hiding, and for her to kind of have this duology with her where she was nice to her face but unkind to her behind her back and to her child. I think that's where she drew the line, was like, you can do whatever you can't want to me, but she mama bared and was like, you don't treat my daughter that way, you don't disrespect my daughter in that way. And I think she realized that Stella would probably always do that, have that duology, like Jekyll Hyde type mentality of, she means well, she wants to do well, but she's still hiding that truth, so she's going to lash out when she feels threatened. And then she was just like, no, like, I'm drawing the line here.
So like you said, Barbara, I think that, I don't know if she ever would have told her. I think that maybe of anybody in the story that was part of that side of her life, I think Loretta would have been the one she told. And I think, like, also, like you said, like, there were moments where you could tell she was fantasizing and thinking about telling her. Like when they were in her family, when Loretta and her husband and daughter were about to move, she was thinking about like just walking over there and telling her, because that was going to be the last time they saw them. And then she ended up not doing it, obviously. But I don't know if Loretta ever suspected anything about Stella. There were kind of moments in the book where it kind of tilted that direction. Like maybe that she did have some inkling that, that Stella wasn't just a white woman. But if that was the case, they never, straight up said anything. I think that if they had been friends for a longer amount of time, and if their friendship hadn't caused like that nuclear explosion in the neighborhood with all the white ladies being like, well, you're friends with her, what are you doing? And freaking out, I think eventually that she probably would have told her the truth, and it would have been like her one confidant. But obviously we didn't get to see that. That's
kind of what I was thinking. Like, I would like to think that Loretta would have been the one person she would have felt comfortable telling the truth, simply just because she seemed to feel so connected and safe with her when they had their interactions. I also thought she might tell her the truth when they had their falling out, after Loretta heard about what Kennedy had said. But I thought at that point, it might be a conversation of, no, like, we're actually half black, or like, and just telling her the truth or whatever at that point. But unfortunately, I was wrong. So.
All right. So let's talk a little bit more about something different, get away from Stella for a minute, and talk about Jude and Kennedy's relationship and their dynamic. I thought that was one of the more compelling relationships in the book. Why do you think they ended up staying in touch after everything was said and done, and everything that happened? So like I was saying, I really enjoyed their relationship, Jude and Kennedy's relationship. It was interesting because, like, initially there was no good reason for Jude to like Kennedy. The only reason Jude was around her was because she wanted to get more information about Stella, because she thought Stella was her mom. Eventually that's confirmed. And then eventually, I mean, there's not really any good reason for Kennedy to like Jude either. Like, neither of them really are super friendly to each other throughout the book. And I think that they end up staying in touch, and the dynamic that they end up having is there's this innate familial connection, because beyond like their immediate family, neither of them have any they don't have anybody else. Like, they just have, like, for Jude, she just has her mom and she has her grandma. For Kennedy, she has her mom and dad, and that's it. They don't really have any family. And so I think that their connection as cousins kind of supersedes the fact that they don't really have any other kind of connection. I think that's why they stay in contact.
Yeah, so I feel like they have a connection after everything that happened and just what they went through. I do think that despite Jude trying to gather information, that they did kind of form a genuine relationship during that time, even if it was kind of a weird one. And I think that Kennedy wants to know about that part of herself, knowing that, she has this whole other identity that she's just learning about, and she wants to feel connected to family, even if she didn't know that they previously existed. So I feel like that is why they stayed in touch, because, she does want to know where she came from, essentially.
Yeah, so I also enjoy their relationship and dynamic. I feel like I would disagree a little bit with what Michael said as far as they didn't have any reason to like each other or whatever. Kennedy had no reason to like Jude. Jude was not rude to Kennedy, I don't think, whatsoever. I don't think she had any place of malevolence coming from her, as far as Kennedy was just kind of treating her like she kind of treated everyone. So it's not like she was treating her any differently. She was just like a whatever, because that's how she treated everybody. And I think it was funny because Jude still stuck around and kind of put up with Kennedy's BS. And I think that made Kennedy like her, because like I think she was used to like treating people poorly and then having them either accept that and just kind of be in, like leave her, or just like yell at her and say like, oh, you're such a roaring bitch, like why are you like this, and then leave her. Whereas Jude didn't do either until Kenny really pushed her buttons. It's funny because I kind of feel like they acted like cousins, you know, like their relationship, even without them knowing. Well, Jude knew, and then she told Kennedy, and then Kennedy was like, oh. And then afterwards, after that initial relationship they had, they kind of lost touch for a while until they met up again in New York, I believe. And you could see the desperation in Kennedy after she realized it and Jude confirmed their relationship. Like, you could see how much Kennedy needed that and wanted that relationship, because she like was like, oh, you like, she was desperate when she called and couldn't get a hold of Jude, and she was like, you didn't bother to say like what hospital you were in, like I could have never seen you again or talked to you again. And I feel like after that, Jude was more of the like she wanted to tell her, she wanted to like, hey, like I did my part, you know, I told you where you came from, I did that, you do with it what you want. And Kenny was the one who was going after it, who I feel like wanted that connection, whereas Jude was okay in her life and her relationships, that she's like, I don't care whether you want to be a part of my life anymore or not. I don't care whether Stella wants to be a part of our lives or not. Like, I've made my, what is it? What is the saying? I made my bed. Is that a saying? I made my bed or whatever? Yeah. Or I made my whatever.
Made my peace with it.
Yes, that's it. I made my peace with it. Whereas Kenny was like the opposite, where she wanted more. As far as why they stayed in touch, I don't know if so I think they said like after a while, because we get a part of Kennedy's, in one of her chapters or her perspective, we get where she talks about like her future, where she never married, she never had children, none of that kind of, she kind of said that they talked, but they didn't really have like a relationship. They just kind of maybe talked once in a while. So that makes me a little sad, because I kind of wanted them to develop a relationship, and that could probably just be stemming from me wanting that like relationship with my cousins and stuff, since like I live here and all of my family doesn't. And so I kind of feel like that pull of like I would want that, so I wanted that for them.
All right, so final question. What did you think about the ending? Were you happy to see Desiree finally leave Mallard?
Yes, I was.
I was gonna say that's it. Just yes.
Yeah, I mean, she escaped at one point and came back. I was happy to see her being able to kind of move on, I guess.
So for all the characters, I thought it was interesting because we don't really get, like, we don't know what the hell happens with Stella after she leaves. We don't know if she made peace with her demons or not.
Which I feel like worst.
I know. I get it. As far as Desiree, I think we get the most out of Desiree and Kennedy. As far as that goes, like, I'm so happy Desiree left if that's what she truly wanted. I think it's very brave of her to have stayed for her mom, and that's why she stayed, because she didn't want to abandon her mother twice. So it was nice to see maybe that chapter of her story close. As far as for Jude and Reese, obviously they stay together. I believe that Jude gets everything she wants as far as like she's becoming the doctor that she always wanted to be. As far as Kennedy, like I said, like we get a few hints of kind of what happened with her as far as like she kind of pursued acting, but her biggest role was like a minor soap opera character that they kind of just wrote away after a while. She didn't really do much after that, and she never got married, never had kids, none of that kind of stuff happened. So we kind of get a hint of it, but I feel like she still maybe seemed lost and not happy with, I wouldn't say with her life, just what became of her. I feel like she was still pursuing or still searching for what it meant to be her. I feel like the book hinted that she never maybe ended that chapter or was satisfied with that. I was happy with the way it ended, but it also kind of, I feel like it was not a happy ending for all the characters, since there's a lot left that we didn't know about. And I mean, that's life. Like, we don't get to know about stuff like that. So I enjoy the ending. I get it. But I like, I like knowing what happened to characters. But I mean, that's the whole point. Like, as a reader, we get to kind of maybe envision what happens to the characters and maybe put that, out into the world, I guess. I don't know.
I liked the ending. I think it was good to see Desiree get to leave Mallard again, since that was obviously the goal all along, and she kind of got pulled back there due to circumstances beyond her control. It was the only place she thought she could really feel safe and get away from, I don't remember that guy's name, her husband that beat her, but that was like the one place that she thought she could get away and be hidden from him. And so that's why she ended up there. So yeah, I liked that she left, and that was a good ending. It kind of just ended, but that's kind of how slice of life stories go. It
was a cool end. Like, I thought that was an interesting way of it. Just kind of ends with that there. Like, it's a hopeful ending, I would say,
yeah.
It's a hopeful ending for their future. But I wanted more. I want to know what happened.
Give me more.
Yeah, I really wanted to know what happened specifically with Stella and with her.
Like, do you think she ever
family?
Right? Like, did she ever reach out to Desiree? Right. Did they keep in touch? Did her and Kennedy kind of mend their relationship, or would it always be that kind of broken, fissured relationship after the fact? Like, I wanted to kind of
all the questions.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff unanswered, but I think that also is common in slice of life, because we're just getting a slice, right? We're not getting the complete story. Do you think that Brit Bennet would ever create a sequel to this, like to continue their story? Or do you think this is
I don't
one
think
and done?
so. There's no reason to. It's one of those things where she shouldn't. I hate when people write sequels or for like TV just to do it. Like,
yeah.
You have to have a good poignant reason to, and these characters need to grow. And if your characters aren't growing and learning, then it's just stagnant to me.
Fair enough. I was just wondering what your opinion was on it. So let's go over our individual scores. Barbara, what did you give The Vanishing Half?
Your favorite score in the world, a 7.75.
Too many damn decimal points. I gave it a 7. Lauren, what'd you give it?
I gave it a 7.5.
Which made our group score today a 7.4 out of 10 for The Vanishing Half.
Have feedback about today's episode? Contact us by writing to badassliteraturesociety@gmail.com. You can also send us a DM or leave a comment on Instagram or Facebook.
Make sure you're following Badass Literature for free in your favorite podcast app. Give us a rating and leave us a review if they allow you to. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media. Our username on both Instagram and Facebook is @BadassLitPod. And with that, we will see you guys next time. I'm Michael.
I'm Barbara.
And I'm Lauren.
Bye.
Bye.
How'd you like my radio voice? Was that good?
That was beautiful.